My husband was standing at the bottom of the attic stairs, a house for sale flyer in one hand and a glossy RV brochure in the other. I had no idea the person climbing those steps that day wasn't just coming to put a price on my junk. They were also bringing my Aunt Louise's name in a stack of legal papers. My name is Margaret Ellison, but everyone in town just calls me Maggie. I'm 68. There's more gray than brown in my hair these days, and my hands shake a little when I hold my morning coffee. But they're still steady enough to open the old kitchen window and look out at the line of maple trees along the porch. I live on the edge of a small town in Vermont, the kind of place you can drive through in 5 minutes and forget you ever saw. Unless your whole life is nailed into the beams of one particular house like mine is. Our place is more than 100 years old. Every winter, it gets whiter. The wind sneaks in through the cracks. Every fall, the maple leaves pile up on the steps. People keep telling me to remodel, make things tighter, cleaner, more efficient. I just keep patching and mending what I can because every time I tilt my head up toward the ceiling, I think about Grandma and Aunt Louise. They lived in this house before me. They survived rougher winters than I ever have, and I never heard either of them complain. My favorite part of the house isn't the living room or the kitchen. It's the attic. It's cramped and dusty up there. In the summer, it's like an oven. In the winter, it's so cold your breath turns into fog. But that's where the things live, the things other people call old junk, and I call stories that haven't finished being told yet. Grandma's old trunk, the radio Aunt Louise used to listen to late-night programs on, the green glazed china set that only came out on holidays, wobbly wooden chairs Grandma used to sit on while she mended clothes. To my husband, Gary, all of that is just junk. Gary is 70, 2 years older than I am. He used to be a salesman, could talk anyone into anything when he was younger. His whole life he's believed a man has to look the part. Decent car, clean shirt, pressed pants, never let anyone see you struggling. I used to admire that in him. It looked like drive and ambition when we were young. Over the years, it turned into something else, a terror of looking poor. A ballooned-up ego that bumps into any old thing that doesn't fit his idea of success. When we were young, we had some good years. Gary worked full-time. I worked part-time at the library and helped Grandma at the little general store she ran with Aunt Louise. Then Grandma died. Aunt Louise started getting weak. The store shut down, and what was left was this house, the attic, and the things they left behind. Aunt Louise never married. She lived with Grandma her whole life, keeping the store going and collecting a few small antiques along the way. She used to say to me, "Things are only junk in the hands of someone who doesn't know their story. If you know the story, you're the one holding the treasure." When she died, she left me 2 envelopes. One was a brown one she told me to open right away. Inside were just a few thin lines in her spidery handwriting. Keep the things that remind you where you come from. Don't rush to sell them just because somebody says they're worthless. The second envelope was sealed tight. On the front, she'd written, "Only open this when you truly feel you're about to lose everything." I tucked it in the bottom of her trunk for years. Every now and then I'd touch it, but I never opened it. I figured about to lose everything had to mean something big, worse than a fight with my husband or a scare with a bill. It sounded like the kind of moment you can't unlive once you reach it. Gary never thought much of any of that. Every time he climbed up to the attic to help me hunt for the Christmas decorations, he'd grumble, "Look at this. I bust my back my whole life to pay the mortgage, and you keep this junk pile up here for the mice. Anything worth selling? Doubt it. Nobody wants moldy cabinets and busted radios, Maggie." I didn't argue. I'm used to swallowing my words to keep the peace. I'd just wait until he went back down, then go over and wipe the dust off the cabinet, smooth my hand along the radio, like I was apologizing to them for letting somebody call them trash. But age, sickness, and bills don't care about family stories. Taxes went up. The roof started leaking. Gary got his hours cut at work, then retired for good. Our oldest son, Luke, lost his job. Last I heard, he wanted to open some kind of retro-style bar in the next town, but didn't have the money. Every time he called his dad, I heard the same thing through the thin walls. Dad, I just need a little push to get started and I'll make it. I don't want to grow old like you and Mom, stuck in that old house in the middle of nowhere. Night after dinner, after the clatter of forks and plates had died down, Gary laid 2 sheets of paper on the table. One was a house for sale printout from the internet. The other was a glossy picture of a shiny RV. Beside them sat his half-emptied beer can. "I've figured it out, Maggie," he said. "We sell this place, pay off the debts, buy an RV, and go see the country. Whatever's left, we give Luke a little stake so he can start that bar. You're too old to be clinging to that dusty attic. I already lined up an appraiser. She's coming to look at the old stuff up there, see if it's worth anything. We'll sell the whole lot, lighten the load, and start living for real." The old stuff he was talking about was 3 generations of women in my family. I held onto the edge of the table so my hands wouldn't show how much they were shaking. Part of me wanted to shout, "No, that's Grandma's house. That's Aunt Louise's house. That's their last promise." But the part of me that spent decades nodding along and smoothing things over whispered, "Maybe you are being selfish. Maybe it really is just junk to everyone but you." I didn't know that the day I weakly nodded and agreed to let an appraiser come was the day I stepped right up to that line Aunt Louise had written about to lose everything. And I certainly didn't know that the person climbing those attic stairs wasn't just bringing a measuring tape. They were bringing a folder, a notary stamp, and the name Jonathan Pike, the lawyer Aunt Louise had written down in a letter I'd never been brave enough to open. The appointment came faster than my heart could catch up. 2 days after that dinner, Gary drove into town early, said he was meeting a potential buyer he'd found online. He didn't share details. All he said as he stepped out the door was, "You just stay home and don't overthink this. Let me handle it. I already promised Luke." I watched the door close behind him. The kitchen went quiet except for the wall clock ticking loud and steady. When I said, "Okay," Gary had heard I surrender all decisions. In my mind, "okay" was just me trying to hold what little peace we had left. That afternoon, I climbed up to the attic by myself. The old wooden pull-down ladder creaked under my weight. The smell of dust and dry wood and old fabric rolled over me like a wave. Late sunlight slanted through the tiny window, painting yellow stripes across the floorboards. I opened Aunt Louise's trunk. On top were folded tablecloths, curled black and white photos, and her little spiral notebook where she'd written down purchase prices and trades from the store days. I sat on the floor and flipped through the pages. Green china set, swapped for 2 sacks of flour and a bag of sugar. Every line was a little piece of somebody's life. My hand brushed the second envelope. It lay at the very bottom of the trunk, stiff and thick, the paper slightly yellowed. The words, "Only open this when you truly feel you're about to lose everything," seemed to glow in the slanting light. What counts as about to lose everything? Losing the house? Losing my husband? Losing my children? Or losing myself? I picked the envelope up, my thumb hooked under the flap. One little tear and I'd know. My heart thumped so hard I could hear it. Then my hand dropped. I folded the envelope back up and put it exactly where it had been. I wasn't sure I was at that point yet, or if I was just scared and tired. I've spent my life fitting myself into whatever space other people left for me. I knew that once I opened that letter, I might have to do something bigger, something louder than I've ever allowed myself to do. "Not yet," I whispered into the trunk, as if Aunt Louise were perched somewhere nearby listening. "Let's wait and see, okay?" The morning of the appointment, the sky was heavy and gray, and a cold wind kicked a few stubborn maple leaves down the street. I got up earlier than usual, put the coffee on, reheated some bread for toast. My hands went through all the motions they know by heart, but my mind didn't finish a single one. I walked up and down the stairs, worrying the house was too cluttered, then telling myself that was ridiculous. This wasn't a hotel. Gary was the opposite of me that morning. He woke up late but got ready like it was a big sales meeting. He shaved, splashed on the old cologne he saves for important days, and put on his dark blue dress shirt. When he stepped into the kitchen, the smell of that cologne mixed with the coffee and pulled me back to the days when he'd leave for work in a rush, still buttoning his cuffs in the doorway. "Today's a good day, Maggie," he said, pouring himself a cup. "Don't worry, I've set everything up. The appraiser will just look around, say what the stuff is worth, and then I'll talk with the buyer. You just sign. That's it. New life." I didn't ask what new life meant to him. I looked at the grain in the wooden table instead, the faint patches of crayon where the kids had colored when they were little, and I'd refused to scrub it completely clean. Those faded marks are probably an eyesore to Gary. To me, they're the last threads keeping me from feeling like I've been peeled off my own life. A dark SUV pulled into the driveway late in the morning. I peeked through the curtain and saw a woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a warm coat, holding a clipboard. Beside her was a middle-aged man in a gray suit with glasses and a leather briefcase, not what I'd imagined a junk buyer would look like. Gary rushed to the door, salesman's smile switching on like a light. "Hi there, you must be Elena. I'm Gary Ellison. Thanks for coming. Come on in, come in." The woman, Elena, shook his hand and smiled politely. Her voice had a faint accent from some other part of the country. "Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Ellison. This is Mr. Jonathan Pike from our office." Gary froze for a second. I thought it was just you. I hired an appraiser, not a lawyer." Jonathan gave a small, calm smile. "Elena is handling the appraisal. I'm just here to check a few details related to some heritage records. We noticed a few names in your emails that match entries in an old archive. I think Mrs. Ellison will understand better once we see what's in the attic." Gary's jaw tightened at the word heritage. He glanced at me, looking for validation. "They're lawyers. Everything has to sound dramatic. Let's just go up. Show them the junk, Maggie." I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded. Inside that word, heritage, hit something deep and old. We lined up in a little procession, Gary in front, Elena behind him, then Jonathan, then me. The old attic ladder squealed when Gary pulled it down. Elena tilted her head back to look at it, eyes bright like a kid being led into a toy store. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "This kind of attic is disappearing." Gary cleared his throat. "Beautiful or not, today we're here to see what we can sell. This old house is eating us alive." Elena didn't respond. She just took out a small flashlight and started up the steps. Jonathan followed, still holding his briefcase, eyes scanning everything like he was taking mental photographs. I came last, each rung feeling heavier than the one before. When we reached the attic, the air felt thicker. Elena turned slowly, taking it all in, the carved wooden cabinet, the green china set, the old radio, crates, oil lamps, chairs, picture frames draped with cloth. She walked straight to the tall wooden cabinet against the wall and laid her hand on it. The carved vines and leaves along the doors were worn smooth where hands had brushed past for decades. There was a tiny bird carved into the pattern that I used to trace with my fingertip as a girl while Aunt Louise told stories. "Elena?" Jonathan said softly. She turned, her expression a mix of recognition and surprise. "It's the same piece, Jonathan. The cabinet, and that china set over there, too." I frowned. "What's so special about that cabinet? My aunt always just called it Grandma's cabinet and told me not to sell it." Elena turned to me, her voice gentle. Mrs. Ellison, in the photos your husband sent us, I recognized a few pieces that looked almost identical to items in an old file from a heritage trust we've worked with. I wasn't sure until I saw them in person, but now I'm almost certain. A heritage trust? I repeated. Jonathan set his briefcase on an old trunk, opened it, and pulled out a stack of papers. He flipped to the middle and turned a page toward me. At the top, in faded type, it read, Green Hollow Heritage Trust, Preliminary Donation Agreement. Below that was a very familiar name, Louise Ellison. I read out loud. The last name was slightly smudged, but Louise was clear as day, like she'd just signed it. Your aunt? Jonathan asked. Yes, I whispered. My Aunt Louise. She never married, lived here with my grandma, but I had no idea she worked with any trust. Jonathan nodded. Years ago, Green Hollow ran a program with small antique shops and general stores, helping preserve objects that show the history of this region. According to this file, your Aunt Louise signed a preliminary agreement. A portion of her antique collection was to be transferred to the trust once certain conditions were met. What conditions? Gary cut in, voice sharp. This is my house. The things in it are my family's things. Louise has been dead a long time. If she wanted to give stuff away, she had her chance. Why drag it up now? Jonathan didn't look at Gary. His eyes stayed on me. According to this document, the person your aunt designated as custodian and beneficiary of the collection is you, Mrs. Maggie. It lists your full name, Margaret May Ellison, and in Clause 4, he flipped a few more pages. It says the items listed in the attached appendix are to be transferred to the trust if one of two things happens. 1, when you turn 70, or 2, when this house is sold or transferred outside the direct family line. I felt the floor tilt under me. 70. I'm 68. 2 years to go. Or if we sold the house. What if I'm not 70 yet and we haven't sold the house? I asked. Then they remain under your care, Jonathan said. They're considered part of a heritage collection, with you as the living beneficiary and steward. That means no sale of those items can happen without your consent and notification to the trust. Your spouse does not have the right to sell any of them unilaterally if you didn't sign. Gary let out a harsh laugh. Old paperwork from decades ago. Nobody cares about that anymore. And I'm her husband. This house is in both our names. Everything in it is marital property. If she agreed to sell the house, that junk goes too. That's how it works. By then, Elena had pulled out her phone and was scrolling. She turned the screen toward me. It was a photograph on a private site. The same cabinet sitting in a store with the caption Ellison General Store Cabinet, circa 1910. We didn't forget Mr. Ellison, she said quietly, and nobody at the trust considers these junk. Jonathan laid a few more printed pages on top of the cabinet. I recognized the layout. It was an email. At the top was an address with Gary's name in it, sent to someone named Peter Hawkins. The subject line read, Attic Antique Lot, Full Collection, Urgent Sale. In the body of the email, it said, As we discussed on the phone, I can confirm I'm the only decision maker when it comes to these antiques. My wife is on board with the sale. I just need the funds wired quickly. Attached is a scanned copy of her signature so you can feel secure legally. I saw my name, Margaret Ellison, under a messy scribble that looked like my signature at a glance, but wasn't. My real signature curls up at the end of the N. This one stopped flat. That is not my signature, I said, my voice shaking. I've never signed anything to sell anything in this attic. Jonathan nodded, still calm but firmer now. The buyer, Mr. Hawkins, used to work with a local museum. When he saw this cabinet in your photos, he thought it looked too much like something in the trust's catalog. He sent everything to Green Hollow and asked them to double-check. They forwarded it to us. If this sale had gone through, it would have been an unauthorized sale of heritage property, and using a copied signature that the signer never actually wrote, that can look like forgery. Elena added softly but clearly, "We're here today to assess the value of the items, but also to make sure you understand your rights, Mrs. Ellison. Your aunt did a lot of careful planning. Your husband's preparations seem a bit more rushed." Gary's face turned red. "I'm just trying to clean out this place before the mice chew everything to pieces. I did it for the family, for Luke. You people have any idea what medical bills, taxes, utilities look like these days? She keeps this garbage up here, and you're all acting like it's the Smithsonian. You probably can't get more than a couple $100 out of half of this." I looked around the attic. My hand went to the radio, to that long scratch on the cabinet door I knew by heart. I didn't know what any of it was worth on paper. I just knew it had never been trashed to me. It was Grandma's laugh, Aunt Louise's sweat, all the nights I came up here to cry quietly when my marriage cracked another inch. Elena glanced at Jonathan and nodded. He shut his briefcase and said, "Mrs. Maggie, I think we should go back down to the kitchen, pour some coffee, and talk plainly. About this collection, yes, but also about your husband's actions you didn't know about." Back in the kitchen, my hands trembled so badly I nearly spilled the pot. Jonathan spread the papers out on the table. Louise's agreement with the trust, the emails, the screenshots from the trust's catalog, and then one more document, newer, stamped with a law office seal. "Did Aunt Louise ever mention my name?" he asked gently, like he already knew she had. I thought of the sealed envelope in the trunk. My heart gave a hard, painful thump. "She did leave me an envelope," I said. "Told me only to open it when I thought I was about to lose everything. Was your name in it?" Jonathan gave a small, genuine smile, the first real one I'd seen from him. "I'd imagine so. I met your aunt nearly 20 years ago. She was sharp as a tack. She told me, 'My niece is too kind. I'm afraid people will treat her like she and her things are disposable.' She wanted someone in your corner if that day ever came, someone who could explain the law. And more importantly, just listen." I felt tears sting my eyes. 20 years ago, I was running between the library, the house, and the store, raising kids and trying to stretch every dollar. While I was busy, Aunt Louise was sitting with a lawyer, thinking ahead for me. Gary slammed his palm on the table. "That's enough. You've dug up plenty of old business. What do you people want now? Send me to jail? Drag me into court over some old cabinet and a broken radio?" Jonathan shook his head. "Nobody is talking about jail for you right now, Mr. Ellison. Not if we handle this the right way. The trust's first concern is protecting the artifacts and Mrs. Maggie, their designated beneficiary. However, the fact remains, you initiated a transaction based on misrepresenting your authority and using a signature your wife did not provide." Gary scoffed. "She's my wife. What's hers is mine. Who's paid the mortgage, huh? Who's paid the taxes, the bills? I did. What did she bring in? A little library money? If it weren't for me, the bank would have taken this place years ago." I lifted my head. For the first time since they stepped into the kitchen, I didn't dodge his eyes. "If it weren't for Aunt Louise, this place might not be ours anymore," I said quietly. "If it weren't for the money she sent, you wouldn't have been able to fix the roof that one year. If it weren't for that little savings she left, you wouldn't have started that garage project back then, remember? Do you remember whose name was on those checks?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched. Then he muttered, "Yeah, well, that's your family. You always side with your mother's people. Where does that leave me? Like I'm just some outsider in my own house." Jonathan stepped in, voice still calm but with a steel thread running through it now. "Mr. Ellison, let me make this simple. If we treat this as financial abuse and attempted forgery, Mrs. Maggie and the trust can file a suit. The court would look at your actions, the property, all of it. The house and contents could be pulled into that. If, instead, you cooperate, we can resolve this with a civil agreement. He turned to Elena. Elena, from an artifact standpoint? She flipped open her notebook. Just the cabinet and the china set alone have meaningful collector value, assuming proper documentation and care. But to us, the historical story is equally important. The trust is willing to help Mrs. Maggie preserve and, if she wishes, exhibit these items. The only non-negotiable condition is this: she is the decision maker, not you. For the first time in my life, I heard someone say out loud, "You are the decision maker, not him." It felt strange. My skin prickled. Jonathan slid a new document across the table toward Gary. "This is our proposal. Read it. I'll explain anything you don't understand." Gary shoved it back with the tips of his fingers, not even glancing down. "I'm not signing anything. I don't trust any of you. This is my house." I looked at the paper, at the neat lines of text. Memorandum regarding heritage property. Acknowledgement of beneficiary rights. Commitment not to transfer without consent. Every sentence felt like a rope, binding but also protective. My head spun, but underneath the dizziness, something rolled out of the shadows and stood up. Anger. Not anger because he'd called my things trash. I'd heard that for years. Anger at the sheer entitlement, using my name and my signature as if I were a rubber stamp he could slap on anything that fit his plans. Telling strangers he was the sole decision maker when he hadn't even given me the courtesy of a real conversation. I took a breath and heard my heartbeat in my ears. "Let me see it, Jonathan," I said. I read every line. When I didn't understand something, I asked. Jonathan answered patiently, without pushing. The agreement wasn't a divorce decree or a court order. It was a preliminary settlement. Gary would acknowledge that the listed items belonged to a heritage collection with me as the beneficiary. He would not sell or use them as collateral. Any related transaction required my signature and the trust's knowledge. He would deal with Mr. Hawkins on his own and return whatever deposit he'd taken. He would not fight the trust or me if we later decided to use the collection for other projects. "I want to add something," I said when I got to the end. Jonathan looked up. "Of course." "I wanted in writing that any future decision about selling this house, using it as collateral, or transferring it to anyone else has to have my signature. If I don't sign, nothing happens." Gary shot to his feet. "Are you crazy, Maggie? That's our house." "No, Gary," I said, my voice steady. "It was my grandmother's house, my aunt's house. They left it to me. I'm the one still standing in it. You're part of this story, yes, but you don't get to rewrite it by yourself." He stared at me like I'd shape-shifted. For decades, I'd been the sure whatever you think is best wife. The woman sitting across from him now, saying no, probably didn't fit anywhere in his picture of our marriage. We argued right there in front of two relative strangers. Gary said I was letting outsiders stir up trouble. I said he'd spent years using the phrase "for the family" as a crowbar to pry open my savings and my patience. Finally, Jonathan had to cut in, his tone no longer soft. "If we don't reach an agreement today, I will have to report everything back to the trust and the potential buyer in full. At that point, this matter will move beyond this kitchen, and it will not be entirely in your hands anymore." "Not entirely in your hands," made both of us quiet. I looked at Gary. He looked at the paperwork. For all his bluster, he's not a fool. Forgery isn't a joke. I don't know if he started this with malicious intent or just panic, gripping a fantasy of an RV and his son's bar so tight he couldn't see where the legal lines were anymore. After a long, taut silence, Gary sat back down, grabbed the pen Jonathan had laid on the table, and signed. His hand shook, but the strokes were hard. Fine, I'll sign, he said through clenched teeth, but don't think I'll forget this. When he was done, Jonathan turned to me and nudged the pen my way. Now your turn, Mrs. Maggie. This is just acknowledging you've read and agreed. Nobody is forcing you. You can refuse, and we'll take the more complicated, noisier path. I signed. My signature looked shaky, but it was mine. For the first time in a very long time, my name on a line felt like it actually meant something. It didn't end there. In small towns, nothing ever does quietly. That night, Gary called Luke. Through the hallway, I heard his voice, raised and raw. I had this all lined up for you, and your mother and some lawyer ruined it. They're putting some old cabinet and junk above your future. Your mom's treating me like a criminal just for trying to clean out the attic. Luke came over the next day. He stood in the kitchen doorway, taller than I remembered. Shoulders slumped the way men's shoulders slump when they're tired of starting over. Mom, he said, skipping all the usual small talk. Is it true? You care more about some old wooden cabinet than helping me get something going? I looked at him and saw flashes of every version of him I'd known. Toddler clinging to my leg after a fall. Teenager asking for gas money. Young man packing his car to leave for college. We'd scraped and saved to get him there. Then came the bland jobs, the big dreams, the if you just co-sign this once moments. Every time, Gary had used "it's for Luke" to pry a little more out of the pantry of my patience and more than once out of my bank account. Luke, I said, my throat tight, I'm not choosing a cabinet over you. I'm choosing not to let someone use my name, my signature, as a stamp on whatever they feel like, not without me even seeing the paper. He frowned. What does that even mean? Emily, my daughter, showed up at the back door just then carrying a grocery bag. She'd called me the night before and said, I'm coming over. You shouldn't have to face this alone. She set the bag down and looked her brother straight in the eye. What it means, she said, is Dad scanned Mom's signature, stuck it on a contract she never saw, and told some stranger he was the only decision maker. What do you call that, Luke? Family teamwork? Luke swung his head toward Gary. Dad, did you really do that? Gary wouldn't meet his eyes. I just filled out some paperwork so we could move things along. Lawyers always blow things out of proportion. They're in it for the fees. Emily rolled her eyes, pulled out her phone, and opened the email Jonathan had sent me with copies of everything. She handed it to Luke. Here, you read. You're the smart one, right? See if this looks okay to you. Luke read in silence. With each scroll, his face got a little tighter. He handed the phone back and looked at me, his voice quieter now. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? I let out a short, tired laugh. Would you have heard me if I had? Or would you have just heard the parts that fit your plans? He didn't answer. Gary jumped back in, desperate and defensive. I signed what they wanted yesterday. Isn't that enough? What more does she want? Kick me out on the street? The word street triggered a memory. Many, actually. All the times he'd said, if you ever leave me, I'll end up living under a bridge. Is that what you want? That fear had kept me in place more than I liked to admit. But that afternoon, the fear wasn't as big as the exhaustion. Gary, I said quietly, you're not going to be on the street. You have a son. You have siblings. You're a grown man. You'll figure something out. But if I keep letting you sign, sell, decide however you please, one day I'll be the one with nowhere to stand in my own house. The kitchen suddenly felt too small for 4 adults and all their unspoken resentments. Elena and Jonathan came back that afternoon with more paperwork, this time from the Green Hollow Trust itself. They had a proposal. We'd like to form a partnership with you, Mrs. Maggie, Elena said. Keep the collection here, at least most of it. Restore part of the attic or the ground floor as a small exhibit space. The trust can help with repairs and signage. In return, we'd run occasional tours or workshops. Your grandmother's and Aunt Louise's names, and yours, would be on everything. I looked up toward the ceiling, imagining fresh boards, patched leaks, new lights, kids walking through, touching the radio, hearing stories about the old general store. It scared me and warmed me at the same time. "And if I don't want people traipsing through my house?" I asked. "Then we do nothing," Elena said. "We'll just help you make sure the items are protected and not sold off in pieces. The rest is your choice." Gary snorted. "So now we're turning the house into a museum? Let strangers gawk at us? I'm not living like that." I turned toward him, and this time there was no tremor in my voice. "You don't have to live here, Gary." Everything stopped. Emily's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. Luke stared at his father, then at me, like he'd misheard. "What's that supposed to mean?" Gary asked, voice low. "It means—" I took a breath. "I want a separation, and if things don't change, I'll probably file for divorce. I don't trust the way you say 'for the family' anymore, not when you treat my side of the family like clutter to be hauled off." Gary gave a hard, humorless laugh. "You throw away 40-plus years of marriage over a bunch of old cabinets and a radio?" "No," I said. "Over 40-plus years of you treating my say, my signature, my memories like they're junk. The cabinets are just the last straw." Jonathan spoke softly, but his words carried. "If that's the path you choose, I can refer you to a colleague who handles family law and marital property. We don't have to decide everything today. But you do have the right to think about it, Mrs. Maggie. A woman like Aunt Louise didn't work this hard, so you'd stay in something only out of fear of gossip." That night, after Elena and Jonathan left, and after Emily walked Luke out to give him time to cool off, I sat alone in the kitchen. Gary stood by the front door, coat in hand. "I'm leaving," he said. "I can't stand this circus. You and your lawyers and your old junk, you keep it all." "Where are you going?" I asked. "Luke said I can stay with him a while. You can call me when you're done being mad." I stared down at my cold coffee. "If you go, you need to understand I don't know that I'll call." He didn't answer. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in and made the unpaid bills clipped to the fridge flutter. I listened to his footsteps crunch across the gravel and fade. I didn't chase him. I didn't collapse dramatically on the floor. I just sat there, counted a few heartbeats, then got up and poured the cold coffee down the sink. A year later, the attic looked different. Jonathan had introduced me to a woman in his firm who handled separations. She walked me through the process gently, helped me straighten out the title to the house, and update the paperwork so that any sale or mortgage would require my signature. Gary hated it, but at 70, with a small pension and a lot of pride, he didn't have many cards to play. He moved in with Luke. They scraped together money and opened that bar in the next town. I've heard it's not bad. I've also heard Gary drinks too much and Luke is already talking about a new plan. Emily, on the other hand, became my anchor. She and her husband bring the grandkids over often. The kids adore the attic. They run up and down the old ladder like it's an adventure ride. With the trust's help, we reinforced the floor, patched the leaks, and added warm lighting. The most fragile pieces now sit in glass cases with little tags. Ellison General Store Cabinet, early 1900s. Green china set, wartime trade. One day, a group of high school students came through on a local history tour. Their teacher asked me to tell them about the store. I stood there in the attic, hand on the cabinet, and talked about Grandma selling sugar by the scoop, about Aunt Louise bartering with folks during hard times, about the winter storm when the store stayed open because it was the only lit building for miles. As I talked, I watched their faces. They weren't just politely nodding, they were really listening. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Mrs. Ellison, why didn't you just sell all this and get the money? That's what most people do now." I smiled. "I won't say I'll never sell anything, But if I do, I want it to be to the right place, for the right reason. Not because someone can't see past the dust, and definitely not because someone calls it junk one too many times. She nodded, thoughtful in that way teenagers get when they're deciding whether to roll their eyes or reconsider their own rooms full of clutter. After the tour, the history teacher handed me a card. Inside was a modest check. The trust had created a small scholarship fund in the name of Louise and Margaret Ellison to be given each year to a student who wrote an essay about local history. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make me feel like all these quiet stories I'd been guarding for decades were finally stepping into the light. One crisp fall afternoon, when the porch steps were buried in red and gold leaves, the mail carrier brought a thick envelope. Gary's name was in the top corner. I took it into the kitchen and set it on the table. My fingertips rested on the edge of it, and for a second, it felt just like that day in the attic with Aunt Louise's sealed letter. Do I open this? I asked myself. There were no instructions on the outside this time, no only open when warning. But I realized I didn't need one. I wasn't scared of losing everything anymore. The things I'd been most afraid of losing, my voice, my signature, my memories, were exactly what I'd started reclaiming. I opened it. Inside were several handwritten pages. Gary's handwriting was shakier now. Some ink blots looked suspiciously like teardrops or spilled coffee. He wrote about the bar being harder than he expected. Luke had a new idea. He always does, which meant more risk, more arguments. Gary said he was tired. His blood pressure was high. The doctor told him to drink less, to slow down, whatever that means to a man who doesn't know how. Toward the end, he wrote, "If there's anything left in your heart for me, I'd like to come back home, not to sell anything this time, just to live out what's left in the place I've spent my life. I'm sorry if I went too far. I know those things in the attic aren't trash to you. I just never knew how to see them as anything but old stuff in the way. I've spent so much time thinking about what I didn't have that I forgot to see what I did have." When I finished, I set the letter down. Emily was sitting across from me, waiting. "Are you going to let Dad come back?" she asked. I looked out the window. The maple leaves were spinning down slowly in the wind. Above me, the attic was quiet, but not in the damp, forgotten way it used to be. It was the quiet of a room that's been swept and aired out, waiting for the next story time. "Your father will always have a place in my life," I said, "but not the place he used to insist on. I'm not undoing what I've signed. I'm not selling this house just so he can feel rich around his friends. If he can accept that, maybe I'll invite him over for dinner. As someone from my past, as part of the story, not as the sole author." Emily gave a sad little smile. "I think that's fair." I folded Gary's letter and slipped it into a small wooden box. Inside that box was Aunt Louise's old envelope, the one I finally opened the night Gary moved out. That night, I'd gone up to the attic, sat beside the trunk, and held the envelope like I was holding her hand. When I tore it open, the smell of old paper and ink and time drifted out. She hadn't written much, but every line cut deep and healed at the same time. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means someone is trying to sell the stories in our attic without asking you. Maybe they're family. Maybe they say it's for everyone's good. Don't hate them for it, but don't let them decide for you. You are kind, but kind does not mean silent. You have the right to say no. You have the right to keep what reminds you who you are. If you need help, call Jonathan. He knows the law, but more importantly, he knows how to listen. And remember, you are not junk. Don't let anyone treat you like you are." I cried most of that night, not because Gary left, not because my life had caught fire. I cried because after all those years, Aunt Louise was still the one who saw me clearly. These days, when I climb the attic steps, I don't feel like I'm hiding. I switch on the lights, unlock the glass cases, let people walk around and run their fingers along the worn edges of the furniture while I tell them about the general store, the sugar sold by the scoop, the bartering, the winter storms. If somebody asks about Gary, I don't dodge it. I say he once wanted to sell everything to buy an RV. Some folks frown, some chuckle, and say they get it. I don't defend him and I don't drag him. I used to let him drive my whole life in the direction he thought we ought to go, I tell them. Now I don't. Sometimes, standing alone up there, I lay my hand on the cabinet, the radio, the china, and whisper, "We're not trash. We're proof. Proof that some things, if you hold on long enough and tenderly enough, will show their worth all by themselves, no matter what anyone once called them." Then I go back downstairs and pour myself a fresh cup of coffee, hotter, stronger than I used to make it, and sit on the porch. The wind bends the branches, pushes a few leaves through the railings, and somewhere in that rustling, I swear I can hear Aunt Louise chuckle. "Girl, the only things you should ever put on clearance in this life are the expired leftovers in the fridge, not yourself, not your memories. Don't you ever mark down who you are just because somebody's trying to haggle."